Hey, I'm Jenny Bradley with Triangle Smart Divorce in Cary, North Carolina, and today I'm joined with my good friend, Jason Walls, who's an estate planner in Raleigh. Jason, you want to introduce your firm?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I'm Jason Walls. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of the Walls Law Group, and we are located in Raleigh and in Pittsburgh.
Oh, I forgot about Pittsburgh.
Yeah, nice little Chatham County.
Wonderful. Jason, you and I both represent a fair amount of business owners. And it's not that divorce is necessarily that different for a business owner as far as the mechanics, or estate planning is that different as far as setting a strategy and doing a personal plan. But it's really different in my world anyway, because this is their livelihood. This affects everything that they have put their sweat into, their blood, sweat, and tears, I should say. And so the stakes are higher, and it just makes things a little bit different in divorce. Is it similar in your realm as well?
Yeah, so we do represent a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs when it comes to estate planning. And you're exactly right. You know, for business owners, man, they're super invested.
Yeah.
Their family's invested. And so making sure that their estate planning addresses what happens to their business and how that relates to spouses or children is super important, and can be super complex sometimes.
It can be, and then you throw into it, as you're doing this plan, you have to have the uncomfortable conversation sometimes of, okay, we can build a business succession plan for if you were to die, sir or madam, but what if you were to get divorced and you're in business together? What happens?
Yeah, certainly that's a level of awkwardness, isn't it?
Yes.
Where suddenly you're in business with your ex-spouse and the drama that brings. You know, this is certainly something that we talk to our business clients about. And one of the first questions we ask them is, do they have any type of prenuptial agreements? Mm-hmm. Are there any type of contractual relationships that's been defined between husband and wife? Whatever the family dynamic may look like, in terms of what does that mean related to the business. And you know, when we talk about divorce, is actually part of what we call the 4 big Ds.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
4 big Ds.
4 big Ds.
Sounds scary.
It's something that I remember because I feel like in law school, that's what my rage looked like, the 4 big Ds. But we talk about disability, we talk about death, we talk about divorce, and then we talk about dissolution of the business. And if the business owner does not have a plan that adequately defines the 4 big Ds, they're kind of putting their business at risk.
Yes, and since we represent one of those Ds over here in Triangle Smart Divorce, I heard you say prenup. I think it's important to note that people that are already married can do a postnup, where they say they can just address the business if they want, or they could address all of their assets and all of their debts related to property division, or as we call it here, equitable distribution. But that's something important too, and that can be coupled with a solid estate plan to be sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, and you haven't built this wonderful plan for business succession in the event of death, and it says what's going to happen in divorce, but it's not aligned with what's over here in real world.
Yeah. This is really where collaboration between estate planning firms and family domestic firms are so important, to make sure that from the client's perspective, they're kind of protected on both sides of that equation.
Yeah, and this is one that I find business owners are surprised by when we break it down and explain it to them. If you owned a business before you were married, the premarital business we call it, and then you're married and you work in that business during the marriage, our law assumes that the assets you have on the date of your separation are marital assets. And this business owner is now scrambling, trying to prove what the business was worth on the day they got married to try to even back that out. But all that appreciation, all that value increase, all that growth of the business during the marriage is all marital because you worked on it during the marriage. And again, the law presumes that your marital time, effort, etc. increase the value. You can completely put that on its head with a good postnup. You can probably put that on its head with a good operating agreement, perhaps, if your spouse signs this operating agreement. But if they're not a party to the operating agreement, no, that's not going to change anything. But that's shocking for a lot of our business owners to say, like, what? I built this business for 10 years before I even knew my spouse. What do you mean I'm now having to fight to get it back?
Yeah, so this is really where business owners need to make sure they have well, I'll throw out this term. I know we've been throwing out a lot of terms, legal terms, but an asset protection plan.
Mm-hmm.
And for most business owners, the largest asset that they have is their ownership share in that business. And especially if we're talking about businesses that may be 7 or 8 figures in terms of
Yeah.
value, you've got to make sure that you have protected that. And you're protecting it not only from your standpoint as the business owners, but you're protecting it also for your employees, your customers, and your clients.
Have you ever seen a situation where a separation or divorce can force a buy-sell under somebody's business agreement?
Yes.
You have.
Yes.
And how does that make everyone feel?
Yeah. So it was suddenly you got a situation where the ownership interest of a business is now fractured.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean in terms of management? What does it mean in terms of key decision making? What does it mean if you had other business partners? What does it mean if you have contractual relationships, loans, notes, whatever that may be? So really, Jenny, it starts kind of this domino effect of issues that potentially are problematic for the business.
Yeah. And I've seen some where there are obviously contractual restrictions that says if you're going through divorce, you can't transfer your shares to your spouse. And that makes our life easy and difficult on some levels. Easy in that now we know that we're not going to be dealing with this complex asset transfer and stock transfer and such, but more difficult from the standpoint that that might be the only asset that these folks have, other than perhaps a house, but maybe it's mortgaged to the hilt because it supported a business. Maybe there's been no retirement because they've been living off the income of the business and not been saving for the rainy day. And so we're sitting here going, okay, well, now we got to value this business, and how on earth are we going to get the other spouse any value out of this business? Because there's nowhere for it to come from. And so that's why it's nice sometimes when we do see a buy-sell, because at least that's been coupled with some sort of key man equity type insurance that there's liquidity
Mm-hmm.
in that we can get to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really complicated. And like you said, the stress of the fracturing of the business and the control and all the other things that are going on top of potentially the stress for the divorce, like really can distract you from running and growing your business, and you end up going backwards. And I've seen business owners have their businesses collapse going through a divorce because they just couldn't keep all the plates spinning.
No question. And you had mentioned earlier about an operating agreement. Operating agreements, as you know, super important for a business. But unfortunately, a lot of business owners, they start a business.
Mm-hmm.
They're super excited about whatever industry that they may be.
Yep.
And perhaps they have not put together all of the key legal pieces that they need to have in place. And sometimes the operating agreement is one of those things that's overlooked.
Yeah.
Or quite candidly, it's an operating agreement that no longer meets the business. It was maybe put together very early in the creation of the business, and now the business has grown. Employees, in terms of gross revenue, whatever that may look like. And so if the operating agreement is not part of kind of that overall asset protection planning
Mm-hmm.
for the business owner, then that puts a major hole in the bucket to some of these issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I've seen situations where people were solo entrepreneurs, started a business, brought in a partner, called them partner, paid them like a partner, never did a partnership agreement.
Yeah.
And now they're going through a divorce, and this person's saying, but I've been a partner in this business, and we're looking at all the documents, and we're going, well, we're going to have to get some corporate lawyers involved to see about de facto partnerships or whatever the appropriate phrase in. Again, I'm out kicking my coverage here on what I know. Because I know divorce law, not corporate law. I just know enough to know again when I have to phone a friend.
Yeah.
But we're going. You might walk out of this not being married and not actually being a business owner, and that's very unsettling to say the least.
Yeah, I think you and I both have some war stories. I've been practicing law for about 20 years. I think you've been practicing a little bit longer, of these situations where business owners did not have the right protections in place.
Mm-hmm.
And then when there is a divorce, when there is a separation, major problems that probably could have been avoided.
Yeah. And you've been talking a lot about asset protection as that's appropriate for everyone, but particularly business owners, and especially when it's their key asset. We still see a lot of folks own things as sole proprietors, just run them with no limited liability in place, nothing whatsoever. And so I know that you have a fair amount of small business people. what would you say to somebody who came to you and said, well, I'm just reporting this on Schedule C and I don't have an LLC or anything of the like?
Yeah, I would probably ask them, what is their risk tolerance? So, Jenny, I started my career as a lawyer over in the Triad, North Carolina, working for one of the state's largest personal injury law firms. So my job for several years was to sue people. And I was quite good at it. It was a certain part of my personality that I think kind of enjoyed that. But during those years of working for that firm, I had the experience of suing several businesses out of existence, quite candidly. And it's because a lot of times they don't have the right protections in place. So even if you are, a one-person operation, or maybe a small, in terms of scope and revenue, relatively small business, it's still super important that you're having the right legal protections in place. And we can nerd out on this concept of inside versus outside liability, but you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself in case there's some litigation that occurs because of your business. But equally important, you want to make sure that you're protecting your business in case there's some sort of personal liability that you may be facing. And so again, this is where speaking to the right attorneys make a lot of sense. It's a really good investment for your business.
Yeah, and I've had some business owners over the years come to me and just say, well, I'm going to put it in a trust and that'll protect me from everything. And I want to say not so fast, my friend, but I think I'll let you say it instead because you can explain why.
Yeah, so just because you place your business in a trust doesn't necessarily give you liability protection, especially if it's a revocable trust. And you probably wouldn't put your business in an irrevocable trust because you're losing control. So that probably doesn't make sense. So, we're very fortunate in North Carolina that we have very good business law. We have the ability to create LLCs. We have the ability to create PLLCs if you're kind of in the professional world
like
that we're in. And those are tools that certainly should be used if you're serious about your business.
Yeah, and I'll say this from the divorce side, putting it in a trust, which is going to be revocable, which means it can be changed at any time or ended or terminated, or putting it in an LLC doesn't stop it from being marital property. The business itself might not be marital property, if you will, anymore, but the spouse's interest in the LLC still is marital, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so that goes back to kind of where we started this whole conversation of making sure that as a business owner has perhaps prenuptial or postnuptial agreements.
Yeah. Jason, I think it would be helpful for folks who own a business, or maybe you're thinking about starting a business, to sort of understand our different roles and thoughts on at what phase of their business and what phase of their life should they be doing different things. So I will say from the get-go, if you're thinking about owning a business, you need to meet with someone, preferably a well-versed business lawyer who understands not only what you're trying to do, but different ways to structure businesses that accomplish what you want. What would you say?
I would totally agree with that. If you are serious about your business, making sure that you've, from the beginning, invested in the right business structure. Understanding what does that mean from a legal standpoint? What does that mean from a tax standpoint? What does that mean? And again, I use this term frequently from an asset protection standpoint. The investment initially in the business and speaking to a qualified attorney is the return on investment for that is going to be huge.
And I would say someone who also understands whether or not you have something that's trademarkable or patent protected or any of those things. And you might have to elevate your game and go see an IP type lawyer for that. But we've seen a lot of competitive names in the spaces out there before, and if somebody had protected their asset, which was their brand in that case, they may not have had as much confusion in the marketplace. So I would add that to my corporate lawyer, because not all corporate lawyers are well versed in that. Just like I'm not well versed in every single nuance of something that might come along in family law. I will not ever, ever, ever do an adoption because they are so nuanced. So I refer those to specialists. I would say that if you are a business owner and you're not yet married, but you're thinking about getting married, as Jason alluded to before, you should be thinking about a prenup, and you should be thinking about how your business is going to be treated upon death or divorce. We can put bare bones stuff in a prenup about death, but Jason is really going to be the one who's going to be able to help you with your asset succession plan. Business succession plan is what I should say.
Yeah, to your point, I think a prenup is one of those almost must-have items from a legal standpoint.
For anyone or for a business owner?
For a business owner.
Okay.
Yeah.
I say for anyone. That's why I was asking you.
Well, it kind of depends on perhaps where they are, right?
Sure.
Certainly if they are maybe a high income W-2 employee or they're an entrepreneur, I would concur with that. But specifically related to the business owner, prior to marriage, if they foresee that in the future, having that prenuptial agreement is a very smart investment.
Then I would say if you're happily married and getting along and you have no documents in place, you still should consider seeing someone like Jason to work on a business succession plan, as well as seeing someone like us to work on a postnuptial agreement to protect your business in the event of divorce. Again, it is a bad joke that sometimes people give me junk about, but nonetheless, your marriage is going to end one of two ways, in death or divorce. And so you should protect your business from both with layers of protection we both can provide.
I totally agree with that. The business succession planning strategy is essential for a business. And really that is to not only protect perhaps the business owners, but to protect the employees, to protect the continuity of the business, to protect perhaps the clients or customers that you serve. So, that's an absolute vital thing. Now, does the business succession plan need to happen, in the first 6 weeks of creating the business? Well, probably not, right?
You should probably make sure you have a viable business first before you spend a bunch of money on lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. But, as that business matures and as it begins to see the growth of revenue, as it perhaps seeing the growth of employees, the growth of clients and customers, then yes, then you need to kind of think through what would happen if some sort of life-changing or life-altering event occurred.
Yeah. And my push for the postnup here is that, as I said earlier, all growth in a premarital business is presumed to be marital. All growth in a business that starts during the marriage is presumed to be marital. And these are very hard presumptions to overcome. So if you want to protect any equity you had in your business before you came into marriage, or if you have a situation with your spouse where they have their career and you're not going to touch anything that they've created, and you have your career and they're not going to touch anything you created, you need that in writing, because just having a handshake deal isn't enough.
Without question. And, depending upon the type of business that we're talking about, the postnuptial agreement becomes even more important. In our business, our spouses technically can't own the business. In most professional types of businesses, whether they're lawyers, whether they're perhaps in the medical industry, engineers, whatever that may be, your spouse is restricted by statute from having an ownership interest. So what does that mean? If I was going through a divorce, what does that mean for my company and my employees and my clients, that suddenly my wife perhaps has, at least from a legal standpoint, perhaps some type of ownership interest?
And I'll say that it's true. As lawyers, our spouses can't own our businesses, and same for doctors and dentists and so on. But if you're going through a divorce, what your spouse gets is what I call an equitable interest in your business. So they're not going to get an ownership interest, but they're entitled to half the value, half the net value if you have business debt. And if that's not what you want, and that's not what your spouse wants, you can contractually agree in a postnup to not do what the law would say. Kind of like you can agree in a estate plan not to follow the intestate succession laws, right? You can say, this is how I want my estate to be divided. So you can contract around those things. And then I would say, and you've alluded to it before, but divorce is a life-changing event on many levels. And whether your spouse has been in your business or not, that's also a time to see you as it relates to the not only business succession plan and to revisit it, but to revisit trust and to revisit directives and all those things. I mean, can you imagine being a business owner, being separated, be on life support, and your entire company's there cheering you on, and the doctors are saying you're going to be fine in a few days, and your spouse says, nope, they're in a coma, I don't see anything, let's go, and pulls the plug. I mean, you just don't want to find yourself in that situation. So
Yeah, it sounds like a bad episode. You remember watching back in the day a show called Dallas?
I do.
Like J.R. Ewing?
That was the Big D I thought you were going to talk about earlier when you said Big D. Dallas.
Yeah. Well, if that sounds like an episode of Dallas, right?
It does, doesn't it?
Something shady like that happened.
Or a Lifetime movie.
I guess we're dating ourselves. We probably need to think about more of
We
like a
kind of are.
Netflix series.
You already said you've been practicing 20 years and I've been practicing 30 years. We've been dating ourselves. Well, what that allows us to do, and as well as the team of employees and lawyers that we both have, is that we have so much experience and we've seen so many things go badly that now we know more how to put belts and suspenders on things to doubly protect people. And that's with coordination with a good family law firm and a good estate firm, so that you're protected for both situations that are going to occur in your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. For business owners who, once they have a certain level of business maturity, once their business has achieved a certain, whether it's income status or revenue status or just been years in business, some of these things that we're talking about now, you have to address for the survivability of your business.
Yeah, because again, it could be your biggest asset, and it certainly is your livelihood, and it is what's providing the income to support everyone.
Definitely.
All right. Well, be smart if you're a business owner and put a plan in place that protects you from both of these. If you need help with business succession planning and estate planning, reach out to Jason on his website. And if you need help with divorce planning, reach out to us at Triangle Smart Divorce.